Now, our next guest, the first time I met him, he said something to the effect of, "Hello, if my connection is bad, I'm sorry. I'm on my beach house on the African coastline, and I may just cancel this call and go back to the beach." And that's when I realized that Christian Stadler is not your regular strategy professor. He took his family from Austria, wise, to Africa for part of the pandemic. And Christian, it's been so fascinating to sort of learn, whether you're sitting, in Zanzibar, in Nairobi, in a conference, or back in Austria. Now, Christian and two of his colleagues from Austria wrote a very, very interesting book that everyone here should be reading. It's called Open Strategy. And I'm going to be very blunt and say, if you haven't bought it, you should, because it has already been called Strategy Book of the Year. And as you can see, Scott's edition is pretty torn up, and he's read it 3 times already. Because Christian, it is a very fascinating book that I think really hit it home for many people. I mean, the reviews that you've been getting in various publications has been, the hard examples to follow for us. So, Christian Stadler, it's great to have you with us. Tell us about open strategy and why that is a new paradigm for strategy.
Okay, thanks, Christian. You guys can all hear me, I'm presuming, even though I'm joining from Nairobi, as you were indicating. And what I'm planning to do, you told me tight deadline, so no longer than 15 minutes really. I will do 2 things. I want to first convince you that the way we usually have been doing strategy in many companies is not working so well, and I explain a bit more why. And then I give you a bit of a sort of glimpse preview into this alternative, more open approach in strategy. Sounds fine to go this way? All right, so let me try and put up, I made a few slides that might be easier to follow me as well. Is it visible? Yes. Okay, yes, and do I need to put something that it kind of goes full screen, or is it full screen on your side?
We see the sort of the several slides, so you want to put it in presentation mode.
Okay, so let me try and put up. I can. Yeah, I'm not sure how I can make this full screen. There, you can see another characteristic of a professor not so good with technology.
You can try the F5
the bottom to the left.
Is this one working maybe?
No, on the other side of the scale.
F5.
On the left side of the scale.
Oh, wait a minute, I need to move this bar that I can see. Here we go, I think. All right, good. So as promised, first a bit about why the traditional way of doing strategy doesn't work so well. And when I say traditional, I mean this sort of more hierarchical structure. You have a small group at the center of an organization who makes the big decisions. Afterwards, when they have figured that out, they inform everyone else how the company will move forward. And I think there's 3 big drawbacks to this way of making big decisions or developing strategy. So the first one is that if the same group of people works together day in, day out, they are more likely to think the same way over time. Now, this is even true for companies that are smart enough to at least look at their competitors. In fact, almost all companies would do that. Yeah, they compare themselves to those companies that are them. But that makes it difficult to respond to very new challenges. And a good example for this is when Netflix arrived on the scene and threatened the big cable companies in the US who provide access to cable television, so companies like COMCAST. Well, when Netflix arrived, Netflix was so popular with people for a couple of reasons. First of all, you didn't have to sit through all these advertisement breaks that you had on usual TV, and you didn't have to pay this huge monthly fee that was $100 plus for cable television in the US. And you would expect, that Comcast and the other cable companies find a response to this particular problem. But what they actually did is they looked at what their immediate competitors did. So Comcast looked at the other cable companies and noticed that these cable companies actually doubled down on the old strategy. In fact, they increased the monthly subscription fees even further, and they increased the advertising time. The logic being that this way you can make up for lost revenues. But of course, that just propels the overall issue that you have a product that is less popular than the one from an entirely new breed of companies. And that, it seems, I think this guy's just stupid, yeah? The reality is that this is a phenomenon that every one of us is entirely capable of falling into. In fact, there's a psychologist who referred to this problem as isomorphism. And what it means is that we become similar in form to others who are close to us. So for example, you're trying to lose weight, but you hang out with people who are heavy eaters, tough luck, will not work. If you send your kids to college and they room with somebody who is more on the lazy side, well, their grades will gonna go down. If you look at partners over the years, they become more and more similar over time. And that's a core issue in the strategy domain, yeah, because it's the same group of senior executives who work together day in, day out, and they'll just sort of find it difficult to think of entirely different, fresh, new ideas. That's our first problem. The second problem has to do with the inability to look across different departments, to cross these bridges in a sort of more top-down hierarchical type of world. And a nice little example is coming from Sony. In 2001, they had a big conference and they brought Stephen Vai, the gentleman here in the picture, onto the stage. So rock musicians, he played a few chords. When he was done, the CEO put his hand in his pocket and pulled out a little device, which, pressing a button, replayed these very same chords that Steve Vai had just played before. And everyone in that room intuitively understood what Sony was up to. Not too long ago, they have created with the Walkman an absolute dominating product in one particular category. And it looked like they were up to the same thing for the digital world. They had to have a must-have kind of digital recorder for everyone. But then something peculiar happened. Another executive, Howard Stringer, who actually became CEO later, also went on stage, also put his hand in his pocket and took out a different device, pressed the button, and once again played or replayed these particular chords. What had happened is that in two different departments, they had developed digital recording devices without talking to each other. Now it became even more peculiar because shortly after the conference, there was a third device coming out. Now you can see that, this is a problem if obviously, you spend all these scarce resources on doing the same thing. But it also highlights why Sony was not able to make the next step. Next step being, digital recorders are not bought for the technology, they are bought for the content you can access. And Sony actually would have had a huge entertainment division. But if even in the technology space, people don't talk to, fat chance that those from the entertainment part will actually talk to those on the technology side. So no cooperation there. Sony never made it in this new area, which was eventually, the market for the iPods to really thrive. Our third problem in the strategy domain has to do with the disconnect between the front line, so those people who should put things into action, and those who develop the strategies. And a good example here comes from Mercedes in the 1980s. In the 1980s, Mercedes were producing these type of cars. So if you were working for Mercedes and you produced these type of cars, you were somebody. This was cool. You parked this big fat Mercedes in front of your house. Your neighbors would come over. They want to have a chat with you, how they can get a job potentially in Mercedes as well. Cool time for you. New CEO arrives on the scene, Edzard Reuter. And Edzard Reuter has this idea that being under pressure with top-end cars, they need to create an integrated technology conglomerate. And to do this, he made, acquisitions left, right, and center, including some of them in the defense industry. Now, in the 1980s, defense industry in Germany is still pretty controversial because the Second World War is still, in the memory of many people. And, sure enough, newspaper articles appear blaming Mercedes for killing kids all over the world in conflict zones. And, it wasn't that cool to be with Mercedes anymore. So now what you have to do is you have to wait in your office, if you work for Mercedes, until it gets dark. You park the car behind the house. You sneak in. You hope that your neighbor doesn't catch you and confronts you about working for this awful company. Now you can imagine, if that's your sort of private life, your enthusiasm to cooperate, to work with the people in the defense arm of the company is rather limited. The entire idea about this big technology conglomerate initiative was that people exchange ideas from all the different places in the organization and come up with entirely new and cool ideas and products. The problem I outlined was one of them, but there were others that, some of the acquisition targets didn't work so well, that they didn't perform. There was simply no cohesion, and the people at the front line had a sense of that from the beginning. They were not on board with this particular strategy. So not surprising, Edzard Reuter was eventually asked to resign, and the company had to declare the biggest loss any German company had reported since the Second World War. Three big problems in strategy, the usual way we do it. People find it difficult to come up with entirely new ideas because they always talk to the same people. People do not connect across the different departments and have problems with replication, have problems with kind of understanding all the opportunities or possibilities you have. And the third problem is that mobilization is much harder if people are just being told what to do. And this, by the way, has nothing to do with strategy not being taken serious by organizations. There was a study by Nitin Nohira and Michael Porter who had the assistance of 27 CEOs taking detailed notes for 3 months, what they did in 15-minute intervals. And 21% of the time of CEOs was spent on strategy. That's a big chunk. Nonetheless, we know that depends on which study. If I take the one we did ourselves, it was more than 50%, 51% to be exact, of strategic initiatives who failed, who didn't meet the expectations that were set early on. So these things fail despite all our efforts. And the way to overcome this is by actually having a more open approach in your strategy, by involving a larger group of people, by involving people that you would typically not have in the room, by involving people who belong to the more front end of your organization. And I'll give you one quick story to highlight that, and then I'll be done. So then, does that sound time-wise? How are we doing? I think then I'm good with time, actually. So that story is a story from Barclays. To be more precise, it's Barclays UK Retail in 2012. In 2012, Ashok Vaswani joined Barclays in the UK as the CEO of Retail. And he was, at that time, obviously aware that there's some changes coming in this industry. He obviously had a sense that, more and more of the banking world will move online, that probably mobile banking will be a bigger topic. And he could have just hired a big consulting company, edged out the strategy, and announced it to the world. But when I talked to him, he was telling me that, strategy really does try to answer three pretty simple questions. The first question is, where are we now? The second question is, where do we want to go? And the third question is, how do we get there? And as he said, there are answers to these questions at every level of the organization. So it makes sense to actually involve everyone in the organization. Now, this is easier said than done because there are actually 30,000 people working in Barclays Retail UK. What did they do? They set up a two-stage process. First step was already unusually broad. There were working groups. One set of groups was representing different functions of the organization, and another set of group were young people who had joined more recently, with the idea that they are not tainted by the common way of thinking in Barclays. And their task was to think of broad ideas where Barclays should be by 2020. After they've done that and they've developed these broad trajectories, Barclays decided to actually involve all its 30,000 employees in the second stage. They did that in two ways. First of all, they rented out cinemas across the country and had big town hall meetings. And secondly, they set up a big, what I would call an online conference type setting, a strategy jam. The way it works is you have a couple of days where you have discussion streams along these big topics where people can join in, where you have some discussion board leaders, and everyone can spin their ideas and discuss how it could affect them, which is pretty important considering we're talking about a 325-year-old bank with a huge network of branches. And sure, digital is going to come, but what does it mean for me sitting there at the teller? What does it mean for me working in the mortgage department? How can I, translate and integrate some ideas into me, into my workplace? I talked to several executives, and they told me the vibrance they had in the strategy domain has been unmatched. people in the mortgage department came up with, Domino's Pizza, big pizza chain in the UK, can tell you when you order pizza, when they put the ingredients on the pizza, when you put the pizza in the oven, when you take the pizza out of the oven, when they deliver the pizza. We in the mortgage department can tell you, thank you very much, we received your mortgage application. And after the whole process is run through, I can tell my customers, yes, you get this mortgage under these conditions, or no, you don't get a mortgage. Nothing in between, yeah, black box for the customer, not in sync with the time. So, as people had a possibility to engage with this, they understood what it means for themselves. Shortly after that jam, Barclays launched a first mobile app, quickly getting 1 million users. Today, with 9 million users, it is one of the most successful fintech products in the UK. And let me repeat, this is a legacy bank. It's one thing if a startup pulls something like this up, but a legacy bank does something so radical that's quite different. And maybe even more impressive, it really integrates almost seamless into the branch network. I had a story from a grandpa showing up in one of the Barclays branches with his new iPad and saying that his grandson had told him that he should go to Barclays to ask people how to set this up because this guy is no digital. Now, it's a bank, it's not a computer shop, but obviously, they developed this ability and also the reputation that they can do that. Barclays opened up the strategy. They brought everyone into this discussion and they came up with ideas that were smart, they were forward-looking, and they actually worked. People could get them inside the organization. Return on equity went up from 15 to 17% in a pretty tough industry. With that, I'll leave it. Well, actually, I know one more thing I do. Yeah, I to make sure that you don't think this is sort of just one fancy story. We have some data we collected a bit more broadly, and on this core idea, can you actually get fresh ideas? The executives we asked, 70% of them, 69% of them told us that you increase both the diversity and the number of new ideas. And in terms of mobilization, 70% of them told us you get more commitment around strategy by opening up the strategy making process. All right, yeah, so, I think, knowing that a majority of strategic initiatives fails, it's worth a try, give it a shot to open up. And I was listening with, both recognition and satisfaction to Jessica's talk earlier, but she also mentioned that they had this big, I think she used the term hackathon, where they brought in actually a large group of people to think about ideas. So in the startup domain, I guess it's a bit more common to use this. And I certainly encourage also the corporate world to employ more of this wisdom of the crowd. That's it, Christian. How did I do time-wise? I think I managed to stick to it. Yeah.
Christian, you did good. Like every seasoned professor, you spoke rapid fire machine gun with great content and great style. Very enjoyable, but also very provocative because many of us we're not used to this. We like executives in small conference rooms with the doors locked because they're easier to manage and control. What you're proposing is very different. Christian, I have one question. What are some of the pushback that you've been getting from the real life executives that may not share your view?
Yeah, so I mean, first of all, I guess some people just don't like that. Yeah, it's a bit uncomfortable as an executive if you're not used to it because you have to change your role. You're no longer the person who develops strategy; you're the person who orchestrates strategy. And if you see yourself really as the strategy maker, it's an uncomfortable situation. So one thing I would encourage, if you go to the website of the book, openstrategy.info, there's a little tool where you can self-assess whether you personally are ready for this. Because in the end, if as an executive you don't like this, well, don't do it. Yeah, there's a few tips that how you can actually get better and more open. But essentially, if you don't like it, you will manage to make it fail. That's, I guess, one thing. The other discussion that often comes out is around the sort of, what about proprietary information? How can you keep secret stuff secret? But there's nice ways to design around this. Yeah, there's different phases in strategy where, if it's just about idea generation, you can open up widely, bring in lots of people. You don't need to tell them what you do afterwards. And organizations like the US Navy have done that. Yeah, so clearly, even in sensitive areas, that's possible. There's a phase which is more around formulating the ideas, where you probably have to share a lot of information. And there I would, typically recommend open up in a way that is more controlled. In other words, do it maybe in a workshop type setting where you bring in people you would usually not, even maybe people from outside the organization, but they sign non-disclosure agreement. So it's a bit more like having a consulting engagement with a larger group than usual. And then there's the dissemination, the mobilization phase, where in the end, you might worry that others find out, but really your problem is that everyone should know what you're doing, because otherwise people can't get on board. And if competitors find out at that stage, they're already left behind because you're mobilizing while they're still trying to figure out what to do. So you don't need to worry about information seeping out.
Christian, this is really a pleasure. And I have to tell, for everyone, so I got a chance to actually, hang out with Christian and Julia and Kurt, who's one of the the co-authors of this book. Really a pleasure, and I look forward to, Christian, whether we are on the beach or whether we are in yet another conference room somewhere. I look forward to hanging out and learning more. So thank you for joining today, and everyone go buy the book. Christian, I have on purpose left several questions for you in the chat. So if you do have some time, I think you can engage in multiple conversations using the chat here on Zoom.
I will, look at the comments. Couldn't do that while I'm speaking, and I'll answer while we do. And certainly, I do hope we hang out again. It's certainly a lot of fun.